in the Appalachians, where our cabin stood surrounded by dense forest on all sides. The nearest neighbor lived 5 miles down the mountain road, which meant we relied on ourselves when trouble came. And in these woods, trouble always found its way. Mom died 3 years ago when Lily was only 5. Dad started drinking heavily after that, leaving me to step into roles I never expected at 16. I became the one who made sure Lily ate 3 meals a day, the one who helped with her homework, and the one who checked for monsters under her bed. "Ethan, can we do the puppets tonight?" Lily asked, her small fingers tugging at my sleeve. She clutched her stuffed rabbit against her chest, its fur worn thin from years of love. "Sure thing." I dried my hands and followed her to the bedroom we shared. Our nightly routine involved 2 old sock puppets Mom had made, one with button eyes and yarn hair, the other with felt ears and a crooked smile. I crouched behind Lily's bed and raised the puppets above the edge. "Hello, Princess Lily," I made the yarn-haired puppet say in a squeaky voice. "Did you brush your teeth tonight?" Lily giggled and nodded, revealing the gap where she'd lost her front tooth last week. I continued the puppet show until her eyelids grew heavy. After tucking the blanket around her small frame, I pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Sweet dreams, Lil." Back in the living room, Dad sprawled across our worn couch, an empty bottle tipped over on the floor beside him. His snores rumbled through the quiet cabin. I picked up the bottle and set it on the coffee table, too tired to feel the familiar frustration. A sharp, melodic whistle cut through the night. I froze, listening. The sound came again, 3 ascending notes followed by 2 descending ones. Not a bird or the wind. Something deliberate. I glanced at Dad, knowing he wouldn't wake even if I shouted. Whatever was out there, I'd have to deal with it myself. Grabbing the flashlight we kept by the door, I stepped onto the porch. Cold air bit through my thin sweater. The woods loomed black and impenetrable beyond the small circle of light from the cabin windows. I swept the flashlight beam across the tree line, but saw nothing unusual. The whistling stopped. I stood motionless, straining to hear anything beyond the normal forest sounds. Minutes ticked by with nothing but the rustle of leaves and distant owl calls. Whatever or whoever had been whistling was gone or hiding. After one final scan of the darkness, I retreated inside, double-checking every lock. Our cabin had 3 doors and 6 windows, each one a potential entry point. I secured them all before returning to my room, careful not to wake Lily as I climbed into my bed. Sleep refused to come. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the whistling in my mind. Something about those 5 notes felt familiar yet wrong, like a favorite song played in the wrong key. The cabin's old clock ticked past midnight when the whistling returned. I sat up, instantly alert. The sound was closer now, almost directly outside my window. 5 notes, repeated slowly. Then it stopped, replaced by something that turned my blood to ice. "Ethan, come outside, sweetie." The voice was soft, gentle, and horrifyingly familiar. It sounded like Mom, the same warmth, the same slight southern lilt, but with something off about it, like hearing her voice through water. "Ethan, I'm waiting for you." I scrambled out of bed and rushed to Lily's side, terrified she might hear it too. She slept peacefully, oblivious to the impossibility happening outside our home. I crept to the window, but couldn't bring myself to look out. The voice came again, this time from the direction of the porch. "I miss you so much. Why won't you come to see me?" My throat constricted. The voice mimicked Mom perfectly, down to the way she used to call me sweetie instead of my name when she wanted something. But Mom was dead. I'd watched them lower her casket into the ground 3 years ago. "Please, Ethan, I'm so cold out here." I backed away from the window. The voice grew louder, more desperate. "Don't you love me anymore? Don't you want to see me?" I dove under my blankets, pressing my hands against my ears. Tears leaked from the corners of my eyes as I fought against the urge to answer, to go to the voice that sounded so much like her. Hours passed in this torment. The voice shifted between sweet pleas and harsh accusations. "I thought you were the responsible one," it hissed. "Your sister would come to me. Lily loves me enough." Then, minutes later, "I just want to hold you again, sweetie, just for a moment." I stayed hidden, shaking, as the voice circled our cabin like a predator. When dawn finally lightened the sky, the voice faded with a final whistled melody, the lullaby Mom used to sing. Morning found me hollow-eyed and trembling. I stared out the kitchen window at the forest. No footprints marked the ground around our cabin. No evidence remained of the night's visitation. Dad stumbled into the kitchen, squinting against the light. He was fighting the hangover that had become his daily state of being now. "Dad, something happened last night," I said, watching him pour coffee with unsteady hands. He grunted, not looking up. I heard something outside, a whistling sound and then a voice. My throat tightened at the memory. It sounded like Mom. Dad's bloodshot eyes darted toward me before returning to his mug. Just the wind playing tricks. These mountains make strange noises. It wasn't the wind. It knew my name. It called me sweetie, like she used to. His mug hit the counter with enough force to slosh coffee over the rim. "You had a nightmare, Ethan." I was wide awake. "Then you imagined it," he snapped, then immediately lowered his voice as Lily's bedroom door creaked open. "Your mother's gone. Don't go making up ghost stories." Lily appeared in the doorway, clutching her rabbit, her hair a tangled mess from sleep. "I'm hungry." I made breakfast while Dad retreated to the couch with his coffee and aspirin. The subject was closed as far as he was concerned. After helping Lily get ready for school, I walked her down our long, winding driveway to the bus stop. The morning air bit through my jacket, but I barely noticed the cold. My mind kept replaying the voice from last night, searching for some explanation beyond the impossible. "Will you make puppets again tonight?" Lily asked, swinging our joined hands. "Of course." I forced a smile, watching the yellow school bus appear around the bend. She climbed aboard with a final wave. I waited until the bus disappeared, then continued walking downhill toward town instead of returning home. The county library sat in a squat brick building beside the courthouse. Rather than heading to school, I pushed through the heavy doors and made my way to the computers in the back corner. The elderly librarian barely glanced up from her desk. I spent hours clicking through web pages about supernatural phenomena. Most sites were filled with obvious hoaxes and blurry photographs, but when I searched for creatures that mimic human voices, a pattern emerged. Across multiple cultures existed legends of beings that lured victims by imitating loved ones. I found an article about skinwalkers, supernatural beings from Native American folklore with the ability to perfectly imitate human voices. The description chilled me. They often targeted isolated families, mimicked deceased loved ones, and used intimate knowledge to manipulate their prey. The article mentioned that skinwalkers couldn't enter a home uninvited. They needed permission to cross the threshold. I checked the time, nearly 3:30. Lily's bus would arrive soon. I quickly printed several pages of information, stuffed them into my backpack, and hurried home. Evening found me in the kitchen preparing dinner while keeping Lily occupied with paper and crayons at the table. Dad sat in the living room, a fresh bottle already half empty beside him. "Look what I drew." Lily held up her picture. 3 stick figures in front of a brown rectangle that represented our cabin. "That's great," I nodded, noticing she'd drawn a 4th figure slightly apart from the others, with long brown hair. I swallowed hard and turned back to the stove. After dinner, I played games with Lily until bedtime. Each moment of normalcy felt borrowed, temporary. After tucking her in and watching her drift to sleep, I slipped out to the kitchen. From the drawer, I took our sharpest knife and returned to our bedroom. Dad's snores echoed down the hallway as I worked quietly, using a screwdriver to attach two small brackets to the window frame. A wooden dowel cut to size fit perfectly between them, preventing the window from opening more than an inch. I sat cross-legged on my bed, knife within reach, watching the window. The curtains remained open. I needed to see if anything approached. The whistling started at exactly midnight, like it had waited for this precise moment. 3 ascending notes, 2 descending, Mom's lullaby tune. Ethan. The voice came from directly outside my window. Why did you block the window, sweetie? Don't you want to see me? I remained silent, pulse hammering in my throat. I've been watching you all day, the voice continued, softer now. You look so tired. Let me in and I can help you sleep, just like I used to when you were little. My hand closed around the knife handle. I'm so cold out here, Ethan, so lonely. Please let me in. Wind rattled the window glass. Something scraped against the outer wall, a sound like claws on wood. You always were such a good boy. The voice paused. But now you're ignoring your own mother? You always were a disappointment. I bit down hard on my lip. Not like your sister. The voice shifted locations, moving toward the other side of the cabin. Lily loves me. Lily would let me in. My blood ran cold. I slid off the bed and moved to Lily's side, placing myself between her and the window. Maybe I should call her instead. The voice took on a sing-song quality. Lily, wake up, sweetheart. Mommy's home. Lily stirred in her sleep but didn't wake. I placed a trembling hand on her shoulder, ready to cover her ears if needed. The voice circled the cabin for hours. Sometimes it pleaded in heartbreaking sobs that made my chest ache with memories of my real mother. Other times it hissed vicious words that struck at my deepest insecurities. Your father drinks because of you, Ethan. If you'd been better, done more, maybe I wouldn't have died. Maybe he would have stayed sober. Each accusation cut deeper than the last. The creature seemed to read my fears like an open book. Let me in now, or I'll take Lily away instead. She'll come with me willingly. I gripped the knife tighter, my palms slick with sweat. Dawn seemed impossibly far away. When the first pale light finally appeared, the voice faded mid-sentence. The sudden silence felt almost as terrifying as the threats had been. I remained awake, sitting beside Lily, knife clutched in my white-knuckled hand. Whatever was out there knew us too well. It would return, and next time it might not just stay outside. The school day passed in a blur of exhaustion. My teacher's voices faded in and out as I fought to keep my eyes open, my mind replaying the events of the previous night. Back at the cabin, I set Lily up at the kitchen table with her coloring books, while I prepared a simple dinner of boxed macaroni and cheese. The house felt eerily quiet without Dad here. He had stumbled out in the afternoon, muttering something about needing supplies. The empty bottle on the counter told me what kind of supplies he sought. You need to eat something more than crackers, I said, placing a small bowl of apple slices beside Lily's coloring book. She absently reached for a piece of fruit, her crayon moving in careful strokes across the paper. The red crayon formed what looked like a dress on a stick figure. Who are you drawing? I asked, stirring the pot of macaroni. Mommy. Lily didn't look up. She was wearing her pretty red dress. I paused, confused. Mom's special dress was blue, remember? The one she wore for your 5th birthday. Lily shook her head firmly. No, she had a red one on last night. The wooden spoon slipped from my fingers, clattering against the stovetop. What did you say? I heard Mommy calling me last night. Lily continued coloring, her voice matter-of-fact and innocent. She wanted me to open the window, but I was too sleepy. My stomach dropped to the floor. The macaroni began to boil over, but I couldn't move. It had spoken to Lily, too. The thing had tried to get her to open the window. With trembling hands, I turned off the stove and knelt beside her chair. Lily, look at me. She put down her crayon and turned toward me, her blue eyes, Mom's eyes, wide and curious. "You didn't open the window, right?" My voice came out sharper than intended. She shook her head. "I was too tired." "Was that bad? Will Mommy be mad?" I gripped her small shoulders, trying to keep my panic from showing on my face. "Lily, that wasn't Mom. Mom is in heaven, remember? She can't come back." Confusion clouded her expression, but it sounded just like her. "I need you to promise me something very important." I looked directly into her eyes. "Never answer any voices at night. Never open the window or door for anyone, no matter who they sound like. Even if they sound like me or Dad. Especially if they sound like Mom. Can you promise me that?" Her lower lip trembled. "But what if—" "No," I said firmly. "No what-ifs. This is about keeping you safe. Promise me, Lily." She nodded slowly. "I promise, Ethan." "Good girl." I pulled her into a tight hug, my heart still hammering against my ribs. After dinner, I told Lily we were going to play a new game called Winterproof the Cabin. I gathered tools from Dad's workbench in the shed and returned with a hammer, nails, and some plywood pieces left over from when Dad had built shelves last year. "What are you doing?" Lily asked, watching me measure her window. "Keeping the cold air out," I lied, forcing a smile. "It's going to get really cold tonight, and this will help us stay warm." She seemed to accept this explanation, returning to her dolls while I worked. I positioned the plywood over her window, leaving just enough space at the top for air but ensuring nothing could reach in or be seen by little eyes. The hammering echoed through the quiet house as I drove nails into the frame. The sun had already begun to set when I finished with her window. I quickly moved through the cabin, reinforcing each window with either plywood or makeshift barriers. The rational part of my brain knew that if this thing could mimic voices so perfectly, a few boards might not stop it. But I needed to do something, anything, to make our home more secure. By the time darkness fell, Dad still hadn't returned. The truck was probably parked outside Roy's bar down in town, where he'd remain until closing time or until Roy kicked him out for starting trouble. Either way, I was on my own. After tucking Lily into bed, I retrieved my sleeping bag from the hall closet and rolled it out on the floor beside her bed. "Are we having a sleepover?" she asked, her voice already heavy with sleep. "Something like that." I placed a flashlight and the kitchen knife within easy reach. "I thought it might be fun to stay in here tonight." She smiled sleepily. "Like camping inside." "Exactly." I brushed her hair back from her forehead. "Now get some sleep." I sat with my back against her bed frame, listening to her breathing become slow and regular. The old clock in the hallway chimed 9, then 10. The cabin creaked and settled around us, familiar sounds that had never bothered me before but now set my nerves on edge. The whistling began just after 11, earlier than before. 3 ascending notes, 2 descending. Mom's lullaby tune, but slightly faster, more urgent. I gripped the knife and stared at the boarded window. "Ethan." The voice came immediately, not bothering with the pretense of distance. It knew exactly where we were. "Why are you hiding from me, sweetie? Don't you want to see me?" I remained silent, glancing at Lily. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. "I see what you've done to the windows." The voice shifted, moving around the cabin. "Do you think some pieces of wood will keep me away from my children?" Scratching sounds followed the voice, long, deliberate scrapes against the wooden siding of our home. It sounded like nails or claws, dragging slowly. "Lily wants to see me." The voice moved to the window I'd boarded up. "She almost came to me last night. Children are so much more open to the impossible." The scratching intensified, becoming a frantic scrabbling against the plywood. I moved closer to Lily, one hand on her shoulder, the other clutching the knife. Then the voice changed. "Ethan, help me. I'm outside." My blood froze. It wasn't using Mom's voice anymore, it was Lily's. The exact pitch and timbre of my sister's voice filled with terror and desperation. "Please, Ethan, I'm scared. Let me in." The voice sobbed with Lily's distinctive catch in the throat when she cried. I nearly leapt to my feet, a primal impulse to protect overriding logic for a split second. My eyes darted to the bed where Lily lay sleeping peacefully under her blanket. The realization of how easily I could have been tricked sent cold sweat down my spine. "Nice try," I whispered, knowing it could hear me. The scratching stopped abruptly. A low chuckle, neither Mom's nor Lily's, echoed through the night, before shifting back to Mom's voice. "Do you remember how I taught you to skip stones at the creek, Ethan?" The voice became conversational, unnervingly intimate. "You were 8 years old, and you cried because you couldn't get the stones to bounce like mine did. I showed you how to hold your wrist just right." I felt the blood drain from my face. This was a specific memory, one I hadn't thought about in years. Or how about when I sewed those sock puppets? The green one gave me such trouble because the button eyes wouldn't stay attached. I had to redo them 3 times while you watched from the kitchen table. The creature was right. The green puppet had been the problematic one. How could it know details like this? "Remember the blue dress I wore for Lily's 5th birthday?" the voice continued. "You told me I looked like a princess, and I said you were the sweetest boy in the world. Then I sang you both to sleep that night with our special lullaby." My hands trembled as memories flooded back. The exact shade of blue, the way Mom had twirled to show off the dress, the proud smile on her face when I'd complimented her. "I know everything your mother knew, Ethan." The voice dropped to a whisper. "Every memory, every secret, every fear. I know how she died. I know what happened that day." Outside, something heavy dragged across the porch. The floorboards creaked under substantial weight. The scratching resumed, but now it circled the entire cabin, up one wall, across the roof, down the other side. Like something with impossibly long limbs was wrapped around our home. "Let me in, Ethan." The voice returned to Mom's gentle tones. "If you don't, I'll take Lily instead. She'll come to me eventually. Children always do." I pulled Lily's sleeping form closer to me on the bed, one arm curled protectively around her. The knife remained clutched in my other hand, though I knew it would be useless against whatever circled our home. For hours, the voice shifted between Mom's tender pleas and Lily's frightened cries. It recited private family moments with perfect recall. Christmas mornings, summer picnics, minor arguments, moments of joy. It knew things only Mom should know, conversations they'd had in private, secrets she'd kept. The night stretched endlessly as I fought against exhaustion. My eyelids grew heavier with each passing hour. Every time they began to close, the scratching would intensify or the voice would sharpen, jerking me back to alertness. It was deliberately keeping me awake, wearing me down. By 3 a.m, my body ached from tension and fatigue. The voice had begun to sing Mom's lullaby in perfect pitch, the same melody she'd hummed to us countless times. Part of me wanted to surrender to sleep with that familiar sound in my ears. I pinched my arm hard enough to break skin, using pain to stay conscious. What would happen if I fell asleep? Would the thing outside somehow get inside? Would it convince Lily to open a door or window? The fear of these possibilities kept me upright, knife in hand, watching over my sister as the endless night continued. I must have fallen asleep in the early morning hours. The knife lay beside me on the floor, and sunlight filtered through the cracks in the plywood covering Lily's window. My back ached from hours spent propped against her bed, and my mouth felt dry as sandpaper. Lily still slept soundly, clutching her rabbit to her chest, oblivious to the horrors of the night. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Dad was home. I carefully extracted myself from the tangle of my sleeping bag and crept to the door, knife still gripped in my hand. My muscles protested with every step. Dad stood at the counter, his back to me as he watched coffee drip into the pot. His shoulders were set in a rigid line I hadn't seen in years. The posture of the man he'd been before Mom died, before the bottles took him. "You're up early," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. He turned around and I almost took a step back. His eyes were clear, not bloodshot, not unfocused, clear and alert, with dark circles beneath them that rivaled my own. He wore the same clothes from yesterday, rumpled and stained, but his eyes held a lucidity I hadn't seen in months. "Didn't sleep," he said simply. "You look worse than I do." I lowered myself into a kitchen chair, the knife still in my hand. Dad glanced at it but said nothing. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one before me. "Something's out there," I said, wrapping my free hand around the warm mug. "Something bad." Dad sat across from me, his hands wrapped around his own cup. "Tell me." The words poured out of me then, everything I'd been carrying alone. The whistling, the voice that sounded like Mom, the way it knew things only she could know, the library research about skinwalkers, the scratching on the walls, the voice attempting to sound like Lily. Dad didn't interrupt. His expression grew grimmer with each detail, his knuckles whitening around his mug. When I finished, I expected disbelief or dismissal. The drunk father I knew would have laughed it off. Instead, all the color drained from his face. "It's not a skinwalker," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a Wendigo." The word hung in the air between us for a moment. "A what?" He set his coffee down and ran a hand over his stubbled jaw. "A Wendigo, spirit of hunger and winter. Old as these mountains." "How do you know?" I asked, tension building in my chest. Dad's gaze turned inward, focusing on something distant. "Because I've met it before." He pushed back his chair and rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a twisted scar I'd seen many times but never questioned. The puckered flesh ran from wrist to elbow, white against his tanned skin. "I was 25, years before you were born, hunting these woods alone in winter." He paused, got caught in a blizzard, took shelter in a cave 3 miles north of here. Something was already in that cave. Something that walked like a man but wasn't. Tall as the cave ceiling, skin stretched over bone, antlers scraping the stone. Dad's fingers traced the scar unconsciously. It spoke to me in my father's voice, though my father had been dead for 5 years. Told me to come deeper into the cave. But I knew. Something in me knew. He took a deep breath. I shot it. Emptied my rifle into it. It screamed, not like anything human. I ran, it followed, caught me at the cave mouth and gave me this. He indicated the scar. Would have taken my whole arm if I hadn't had my hunting knife. My hands trembled around the coffee mug. "You killed it?" "I thought I did." Dad's voice dropped. Stabbed it through what passed for its heart and pushed it off a cliff. Watched it fall hundreds of feet onto the rocks below. But Wendigos don't die easy. He looked me directly in the eyes. "It's been stalking us for years, Ethan. Watching, waiting. Your mother's death." His voice broke. It must have sensed our weakness, our grief. The implications hit me like a physical blow. "It's here because of you?" Dad flinched but nodded. "These things can be patient. They're ancient. They don't forget and they don't forgive. What does it want?" The knife in my hand suddenly seemed inadequate, a toy against something so monstrous. To consume us. All of us. Dad pushed back from the table. "Wendigos start as humans who commit the ultimate taboo. They eat human flesh, usually driven by starvation. The spirit takes them over, transforms them. They are eternally hungry. They eat their victims completely. The mimicry. It's how they hunt." Dad moved to the kitchen drawer where he kept his keys. They learn everything about their prey. Memories, voices, fears. They use it all to lure you out, to separate you from safety. He opened the drawer and removed a small brass key I'd never seen before. Your mother knew, Ethan. I told her everything when we got married. We prepared, just in case. The revelation staggered me. Mom had known about this while she was alive. Had she lived in fear of it coming for us? Dad walked toward the hallway with determined steps. I followed him to the closet near the back door, where he unlocked a metal box hidden beneath old winter coats. Inside lay his hunting rifle, disassembled, alongside a leather pouch. Regular bullets won't stop it, he said, efficiently assembling the weapon with muscle memory unaffected by years of drinking. These might. From the pouch, he poured several handcrafted bullets onto his palm. They gleamed strangely in the light, etched with symbols I didn't recognize. Silver, blessed by a shaman in Cherokee. Dad loaded them into the rifle with reverence. Pure white ash wood in the core, mountain ash berries mixed with the silver. Dad, this is... Crazy? He gave a humorless laugh. You've heard it speak with your mother's voice. You've heard it scrape our walls. Is this really where you draw the line? I thought of those impossible voices in the dark, the intimate knowledge no stranger could possess. No. Lily's sleepy voice came from the hallway. Ethan? She stood, rubbing her eyes, rabbit clutched to her chest, hair a tangled mess. Dad and I exchanged a glance. Dad crouched to her level. Morning, sweetheart. Ethan's going to take you to the basement for a little while. Her brow furrowed. Why? We're playing a game, I said quickly, moving to her side. Like hide and seek, but better. Dad checked his watch. It's almost noon. In winter, that thing's strongest after dark, but it can move during the day if it's desperate enough. He grabbed a backpack and began filling it with supplies. Water bottles, granola bars, flashlights. My mind raced to process everything. Yesterday morning, I'd believed we were being haunted by some kind of supernatural mimic. Now I was watching my suddenly sober father prepare to hunt a mythological monster that had apparently been stalking our family for decades. You're not going out there alone, I said. Dad handed me the backpack. I'm not arguing about this. Take your sister to the basement. There's a storage room behind the furnace. It has a steel door. Get inside, lock it, and don't come out until I return. And if you don't return... His hand stilled on the rifle. There's a tunnel. Your mother and I dug it years ago. It leads to a storm shelter about 100 yards into the woods to the south. Wait 24 hours. If I'm not back, take Lily and follow the tunnel. The keys to the truck are taped underneath the shelter's water barrel. Drive to town and find Sheriff Morgan. Tell him code black. I clutched the backpack straps. I can help you fight it. No. His voice was firm. Your job is to protect Lily. That's all that matters. Dad moved to the window, peering out at the forest. The early afternoon sun cast long shadows among the trees. I brought this to our doorstep, Ethan. It should have been me alone from the start. He checked the rifle one final time, then tucked extra bullets into his jacket pocket. I saw the father I remembered from childhood, the man who could track a deer for miles, who knew every trail in these mountains. This ends today, he said. I couldn't reconcile this focused, determined man with the broken alcoholic who had passed out on our couch nearly every night for 3 years. The contrast was jarring. Dad, I said, my voice catching, be careful. Something softened in his expression. He placed a hand on my shoulder and squeezed once. Take care of your sister. He crouched down to Lily's level. I need to go check something in the woods. You stay with Ethan, okay? No matter what you hear, no matter who calls your name, you stay with your brother. Lily nodded solemnly. Dad brushed a strand of hair from her face with uncharacteristic gentleness, then stood. Dad, please. I started. Get to the basement. He cut me off, moving toward the door with rifle in hand. Now. The weight of everything he'd revealed pressed down on me as I watched him step onto the porch. He paused only briefly, scanning the tree line, before descending the steps and walking with purpose toward the darkening woods. I wanted to call him back. I wanted to tell him not to go. But I knew from the set of his shoulders that nothing would stop him from facing what waited in those trees. Dad had been gone for hours. The small steel door behind the furnace, just as he'd described, had become our hideout. A single room roughly the size of a walk-in closet with concrete walls and shelves loaded with supplies. I checked my watch for the 100th time. 7:36 p.m. The sun had set completely, leaving us in the cold glow of our battery-powered lantern. "Are you hungry?" I asked Lily, who sat wrapped in an emergency blanket beside me. She shook her head, clutching her rabbit against her chest. Its worn fur caught the dim light, shadows pooling in the threadbare patches. "Dad's been gone a long time," she whispered. I forced a reassuring smile. "He knows these woods better than anyone." The words sounded hollow even to me. What chance did Dad even have against that thing? We'd spent the afternoon in this concrete box, surrounded by stacks of canned food, jugs of water, spare batteries, and first aid kits. Mom and Dad had prepared this room long ago, knowing what might someday come. The thought of Mom living with this knowledge all those years made my chest ache. Lily leaned against my side. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and pulled her closer. Above us, the cabin creaked and settled. Each sound was amplified by my heightened senses. "Can we do puppets?" Lily asked, her voice small. The puppets were upstairs in our bedroom, far from reach. "Not tonight, Lil. But I can tell you a story instead." I launched into a tale about a brave princess who protected her kingdom from dragons. Lily listened with half-closed eyes, exhaustion gradually winning over fear. My voice filled our small sanctuary, bouncing off concrete walls as I embellished details to keep her mind occupied. The first gunshot stopped me mid-sentence. Lily jerked upright. "What was that?" A second shot followed, then a third in rapid succession. They came from the distance, perhaps half a mile into the forest. "It's just Dad," I said, tightening my hold on her. 2 more shots echoed through the night. Then silence stretched for a full minute. The shriek that followed wasn't human. It pierced the air like metal scraping against metal, high-pitched and primal. The sound vibrated through the basement walls, rattling the sparse shelving and sending dust motes dancing in the lantern light. Our water bottles trembled on the concrete floor. The inhuman cry lingered, fading slowly like a dying radio signal. Lily pressed her face into my shoulder, her body shaking. "What was that?" "Just the wind," I lied, stroking her hair. "Sometimes it makes weird noises through the trees." Another shot rang out, followed by 3 more in quick succession. Then nothing. We sat frozen in our concrete box, listening to the crushing silence that followed. Minutes stretched into an hour, marked by the steady tick of my watch and Lily's gradually slowing breaths as she drifted between wakefulness and uneasy sleep. I strained to hear any indication of what had happened in those woods. Had Dad succeeded? Was the Wendigo dead? Or had it taken him, adding his memories and voice to its arsenal of weapons? The creak of a floorboard overhead snapped me to attention. Lily stirred against me. "Is Dad back?" I held my breath, listening. Slow, heavy footsteps moved across the porch. The front door handle rattled, followed by a forceful knock. "Ethan! Lily!" Dad's voice called out. "It's over. Let me in." Relief flooded through me, but something held me back from rushing upstairs. Something in his voice sounded wrong, a barely perceptible flatness, like a note played slightly off-key. "Is that Daddy?" Lily whispered, already pushing herself up. I caught her arm. "Wait here." "But it's Dad," she protested. "I know. I just want to make sure everything's safe first." I guided her toward the back of the small room. "Hide behind the water heater until I come back, okay?" Don't come out for anyone but me." She hesitated, then nodded and squeezed behind the large tank in the corner. "Ethan! Lily!" The voice called again, more insistent now. "I'm hurt. I need your help." I reached for the steel door handle, then paused. If it really was Dad, wounded and needing help, every second mattered. But if it wasn't? "Stay hidden," I whispered to Lily, "no matter what you hear." I slipped through the door, closed it behind me, and moved quietly across the basement toward the stairs. Each wooden step threatened to announce my presence with a betraying creak. I tested each one carefully before putting my full weight down. "Son, I'm hurt. Please open the door." The voice was perfectly pitched as Dad's, carrying the right mix of pain and authority. At the top of the basement stairs, I pressed my ear against the door leading to the kitchen. The footsteps paced back and forth across the porch, too rhythmic to be casual movement. I cracked the door open and slipped into the dark kitchen. Moonlight filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the countertops. I crept toward the living room, staying low and out of sight. Through the front window, I could make out a figure standing on the porch. It had Dad's broad shoulders and his height, even wore his hunting jacket and carried his rifle. But something was fundamentally wrong with how it stood. Too perfectly still one moment, then moving with jerky, uncoordinated motions the next, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. "Ethan, I know you're in there." The thing that looked like Dad pressed its face against the window glass. "I killed it. The Wendigo is dead, but I'm hurt bad. I need you to open the door, son." As it spoke, its voice fluctuated subtly, slipping between Dad's familiar rough tone and something ancient and hollow underneath. A voice that had never belonged to a human throat. Blood dripped from its mouth and down its chin, dark against the pale skin. Yet it smiled. A wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far across its face. "I can smell you, Ethan," it said, the pretense of Dad's voice slipping further. "Your fear is like smoke in the air." I backed away from the window. My heel caught on the edge of the rug, sending me stumbling against the coffee table. The noise was enough. Its head snapped toward the sound with inhuman speed. Our eyes met through the glass. "There you are," it said, Dad's face twisting into something eager and hungry. It raised a hand to the window, fingers elongating as I watched, nails sharpening into points that scraped against the glass. "Open the door for your father." I scrambled backward toward the kitchen. The thing outside began pounding on the front door with enough force to shake the entire cabin. "Ethan!" it roared, cycling rapidly through voices. First Dad's, then Mom's, then Lily's frightened cry. "Help me! Let me in!" The door shuddered on its hinges. Wood splintered around the lock, fine cracks spreading with each impact. I ran to the closet where Dad kept his emergency supplies. The spare shotgun hung on hooks at the back, ammunition boxes stacked neatly below. My hands shook violently as I grabbed the weapon and a box of shells. The front door gave a final, protesting crack as the top hinge tore free from the frame. I loaded the shotgun, shells slipping between my trembling fingers. 2 shells, then a third clicked into place. The creature howled with my mother's voice, the sound warping into something no human throat could produce. The door burst inward in a shower of splinters and broken wood. It no longer bothered maintaining Dad's form. What stood in the doorway retained only fragments of humanity. Elongated limbs bent at impossible angles, skin stretched thin over a skeletal frame that stood nearly 7 feet tall. Antlers rose from its skull like gnarled branches, scraping the doorframe. Its face was the worst, a mockery of Dad's features melting and reforming, mouth opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. I raised the shotgun to my shoulder, its weight unfamiliar and heavy. The creature took a step forward, blood dripping from jaws that could unhinge like a snake's. What had once been my father's eyes, now sunken, glowing orbs, fixed on mine with ancient hunger. I aimed at the face that was no longer my father's and steadied my finger on the trigger. I sat motionless on the porch steps, the shotgun still warm across my lap. My hands had stopped shaking, but a deep exhaustion had settled into my bones. Before me lay the twisted remains of what had tried to steal my father's identity. In death, the Wendigo had reverted to its true form. No trace of my father remained in the creature sprawled across our yard. Its body stretched long, limbs thin as saplings, paper-white skin pulled taut over a skeletal frame that seemed too fragile to have contained such strength. Massive antlers rose from its skull, now broken where they had struck the ground in its fall. The mouth that had perfectly mimicked my mother's voice gaped open in a final scream, revealing rows of needle-like teeth that gleamed in the early light. My shot had caught it directly in the heart, just as the creature lunged across our living room. The blast had thrown it backward through the doorway and onto the porch, where it thrashed for several terrible minutes before growing still. Then, movement in the tree line caught my attention. A figure stumbled from the shadows, hunched and limping. I raised the shotgun instinctively, my finger finding the trigger. "Ethan," my father called weakly. "It's me. It's really me." Blood darkened the left side of his jacket. His face was scratched and bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut. He dragged his right leg as he approached, but his eyes remained clear and alert, scanning between me and the creature's remains. I lowered the gun slowly, recognition washing through me in a wave of relief. This was my father, not the mimic that had stood on our porch hours before, but the flawed, wounded man who had raised me. He reached the bottom of the steps and looked up at the Wendigo's corpse. Something passed across his face, relief, vindication, and lingering fear all at once. "You did it," he whispered. I nodded, unable to form words. Dad climbed the steps with effort and sat beside me. Without warning, he pulled me into an embrace. His arms trembled as they wrapped around my shoulders. "I thought I'd lost you both," he said, his voice breaking. "I wounded it in the woods, but it was stronger than I remembered. Faster. It knocked the rifle from my hands and slashed my leg before I could fire again." He pulled back, his eyes red-rimmed and wet. "I knew it would come for you and Lily." "Lily?" I gasped, suddenly remembering. "She's still in the basement." We found her huddled behind the water heater, clutching her rabbit in white-knuckled hands. When she saw us, she launched herself into Dad's arms with such force that he staggered backward, wincing as she collided with his injured side. "You were gone so long," she sobbed into his shoulder. "I know, sweetheart," he murmured into her hair, "but I'm back now." That first morning, we didn't speak much about what had happened. Dad cleaned and bandaged his wounds while I boarded up the shattered front door. Lily stayed close to us both, unwilling to let either of us out of her sight for more than a minute. In the afternoon, Dad and I wrapped the Wendigo's body in old tarps and dragged it deep into the forest, far from any hiking trails or hunting grounds. "We need to burn it," Dad explained as we cleared a wide circle of earth down to bare soil. Complete destruction by fire, with specific preparations and rituals. He produced a small leather pouch from inside his jacket. "I visited an elder from the Cherokee tribe after I first encountered this thing. He taught me what to do if I ever faced it again." We spent hours gathering wood and arranging it according to Dad's instructions. He mixed herbs and powders from the pouch, sprinkling them in precise patterns around the pyre and over the wrapped body. As sunset approached, he recited words in a language I didn't recognize, his voice low and reverent. When he struck the match, the flames leaped up high, burning with intense blue and purple hues. We stood watching until the fire died to embers, making sure nothing remained but ash. Dad collected these ashes in a metal container, explaining we would disperse them in running water at sunrise. "Will that end it?" I asked as we hiked back toward home in the gathering darkness. "For good?" Dad's face was solemn in the beam of our flashlight. "Nothing is certain with these ancient spirits, but the elder believed a proper ritual destruction would prevent it from reforming. He looked at me directly. You hit its heart with a clean shot. That was the critical part. Days passed in a blur of recovery. Dad's wounds slowly healed as Lily and I took turns changing his bandages. School seemed trivial after what we'd experienced, but we resumed our routines, clinging to normalcy like a lifeline. One morning, about 2 weeks after that night, I found Dad in the kitchen, staring at the liquor cabinet. Without a word, he began removing bottles one by one, carrying them to the sink. The sharp smell of alcohol filled the air as he uncapped each one and upended it over the drain. "I've been hiding," he said without turning around, "for years." I watched from the doorway as the last bottle emptied. From the Wendigo? From everything. He braced his hands against the counter. From losing your mom, from being responsible for you kids, from my own failures. He turned to face me, his eyes clear but pained. I thought drinking would dull it all, but it only made me vulnerable. Made us all vulnerable. He straightened his shoulders. No more. As winter deepened, snow blanketed the mountains and forests around our cabin. The night winds whistled through the trees and around the eaves, but they carried only natural sounds. No 3-note ascending, 2-note descending pattern. No voices calling from the darkness. Dad repaired the front door properly, reinforcing it with new hardware. He checked the locks each night, then I checked them again before going to bed. Old habits formed from fear died hard. The nightmares came for me anyway. I would wake, gasping, convinced I'd heard my mother's voice calling from just outside my window. Other nights I dreamed of that final confrontation, but in the dreams I hesitated too long, and the creature that wore my father's face reached me before I could pull the trigger. Lily had nightmares too. Many nights she crept into my room, rabbit clutched against her chest, and curled against my side without a word. Her small presence anchored me to reality, reminding me what we had fought to protect. Dad found work with a local construction crew. The physical labor seemed to help him, building calluses on his hands that hadn't held tools steadily in years. He came home tired but clear-eyed, often bringing small treats for Lily or materials to repair something around the cabin. As February melted into March, subtle changes emerged in our family. Dinner conversations grew longer. Dad began telling stories from before Mom died, happy memories that had been locked away behind his grief. Lily started drawing pictures that didn't feature a fourth figure standing apart from our family. When the first crocuses pushed through the melting snow, Dad brought home seed packets and gardening tools. "Your mom always wanted a proper garden," he explained as we cleared a patch behind the cabin. "Something more than just the vegetable plot." We worked the soil together, Lily's small hands planting marigold and zinnia seeds while Dad and I tackled the heavier digging. We marked a special section where we planted forget-me-nots, Mom's favorites, surrounding a small stone marker Dad had carefully engraved with her name. Standing back to survey our work, dirt-smudged and sweating in the spring sunshine, I felt something like peace begin to take root inside me. The terror we had faced hadn't disappeared from my memory. I still checked the locks twice before bed, still kept the shotgun cleaned and loaded in the hall closet, still woke sometimes thinking I'd heard whistling in the dark. Dad put his hand on my shoulder. Lily danced among the newly marked flower beds, pointing out where each type would grow. The mountain spring continued its slow awakening around us, indifferent to the darkness we had encountered.